NBA careers commonly end in one of three ways: through a major injury, the player falling off, or getting too old and retiring. But there's been a very small percent of NBA careers that have ended in ways that just make no sense at all. And one of the very first that comes to mind is Royce White, who some people might not remember, but he was actually a great player. The man was a 5-star recruit in high school and only needed to play 1 year in college to get drafted 16th overall in 2012. But even with that, he only ever played 3 games in the NBA. And that's because most people remember Royce White as the NBA player who had a severe fear of flying in planes. And this was public knowledge at the time when he was nearly drafted in the lottery. But he still flew to games in college, so the Houston Rockets were able to look past this and take a chance on him having massive upside. And within a week of the draft, he came to an agreement with the team that he could drive to games instead of flying to them. And that worked most of the time, but when flying was the only option for him, it became too much. So Royce only ever played in the G League for Houston before they traded him. Then he played 9 total minutes for the Kings before he got waived, effectively ending his entire NBA career, which was the first one that at least I know was ended because of a fear of flying in planes. And it's just crazy that he would pursue a career in the NBA thinking he could make it work by just driving from city to city every single game year after year, and clearly it didn't work. Another NBA career ending that still makes no sense to this day is that of Larry Sanders, because Larry was a guy that played 3 years at VCU, and by the end of his time there, he developed into a pretty solid big man with a lot of potential on defense. So in 2010, the Milwaukee Bucks picked him 15th overall. In his first 2 years on the team, he averaged 4 points, 3 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks a game. But in year 3, he took another step, averaging 9.9 and 2.8 blocks, finishing second in the league in blocks per game and third in most improved player voting. And thanks to that, it landed him a 4-year, $44 million contract extension. Well, in 2013, his season was full of suspensions and injuries. Then 2014 started out the same way until he eventually checked himself into a program that helped with anxiety and depression. Larry Sanders finished the program and released a video saying that it made him realize what was important and that basketball was consuming too much of his life and time right now. He said, "It's not there for me and it's not that worth it." The Bucks then bought out the rest of his $44 million contract. Like, what does all of that even mean? The dude got a huge contract, decided he just didn't feel like playing the game anymore, then just got all of that money from the contract anyways and walks away, barely ever being heard from again. How is that fair? On the other hand, former player Josh Howard had actually established a pretty solid career and name for himself when his career abruptly ended thanks to a YouTube video, which doesn't get much weirder than that. He was drafted by the Mavs in 2003, and by 2006 he was a starter averaging 16 points a game on that team that made it to the finals. He even put up 19 a game, helping Dallas to a 67-15 season in 2007. So he was in the prime of his career when the team was in the 2008 playoffs. The Mavericks were preparing for Game 3 of the first round against the Hornets when Howard had a radio interview that morning where he openly talked about how he uses marijuana in the off season. Today, that's something players openly talk about and you wouldn't even bat an eye at, but back in 2007 it was not a good thing for a player to come out and say, and caused a lot of distraction from the team. Eventually though, everyone forgot about the incident and it blew over. That was until a few months later when a YouTube video started circulating that showed Josh Howard at a football game where the national anthem was playing, and here's what he said.
Banner going on right now. I don't even celebrate that shit. I'm black, goddamn Obama, all that shit.
The incident was once again another distraction from the team late into the season, and he caused a lot of unwanted attention and scrutiny towards the Mavericks. So even though he had just averaged 18 a game once again, it was no surprise that he was moved to the bench the next season where he put up career lows across the board. Got traded to the Wizards, saw his game decline, got multiple serious injuries before his career just pretty much ended because of all of that. And the whole downfall started thanks to him forcing his team to trade him away. Of course, it wasn't the first time a player self-sabotaged their career, but it was definitely the first YouTube video that caused it. I mean, YouTube had only been out 3 years at that point, and Josh Howard wasted no time. One of the all-time best careers in NBA history even ended without it still making much sense. About halfway into his career, Larry Bird was infamously helping his mom shovel rocks to make her a driveway when somehow he got a back injury that would haunt him for the rest of his time in the league and eventually caused him to retire. player. His career was shorter than it should have been, and his game never really had a major decline. He just had way too many back problems to be able to consistently play at a high level. It's just like, why was this man making his mom a driveway instead of paying somebody else to do it? And how hard was he shoveling to get hurt that badly? I've shoveled a lot of things and never had a career-threatening injury from it. What even was the injury anyways? We hear the shovel story all the time, but there's still so many unanswered questions that I'd like to know. But Larry wasn't the only player to cause his own downfall, because Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was the player who was infamously blackballed from the league for refusing to stand for the national anthem before games because he didn't like what it stood for, which once again is kind of outdated at this point, seeing how things have played out, and apparently he was way ahead of his time because we've seen it time and time again since then. Rauf was one of the first though, and it hurt. He had a similar downfall to what Colin Kaepernick did. In 1993, Mahmoud won the Most Improved Player award by putting up 19 points a game, a trend he would continue as the Grizzlies' starting point guard for the next 4 seasons. Then he was in his prime at 26 years old when he refused to stand before one game, which started to get national backlash. The league came out and said that he would be fined $30,000 every time he continued to do so. So he was able to compromise with them, and he would stand, but he'd be able to close his eyes and put his head down whenever it was being sung. And this got so much backlash from the media and fans everywhere that it led to him being traded to the Kings for just a 2nd round pick. And when his contract with them ended, no team in the entire league wanted him and the bad press that he brought. So at 28 years old, he signed a deal to play in Turkey. Pretty much never played in the league again, and instead played overseas for the next 13 seasons. So that's one way to end your own career. But again, times have changed, because look at a guy like Meyers Leonard. He also stood during the national anthem and he was fine. He didn't ruin his own career until 5 months later when he said some racist stuff on Twitch. I mean, this has to be the worst way a player's gone out. He was streaming himself playing Call of Duty, used a bad slur, and played 12 games in the NBA since, and is now out of the league. He was a pretty legitimate backup center in the NBA for 9 years. Then his whole incident happened on March 9th, 2021. Well, by March 17th, he was traded to the OKC Thunder, then instantly waived. He had a surgery that took him out for a bit, but then tried to make a comeback last year for the Lakers, who didn't end up wanting him, and he signed for the Bucks for the second half of the season, but barely ever played, and now he's been fully healthy and still in his prime and still hasn't been picked up, which is no coincidence. The man got mad while gaming, and it ruined his reputation and his entire NBA career. A guy like Latrell Sprewell constantly did things like beating up his teammates and even his coaches that would have ruined most players' careers and gotten them kicked out of the league, but somehow he survived and continued to play like an all-star at times, even with all of his past controversies. But the final blow came when the Timberwolves offered him a $21 million contract, and he said the infamous words, "That's not even enough to feed my family." And instead of signing it, he stayed at home, got no other offers, never played another NBA game again, and eventually went bankrupt. What a way to go out. Then of course, what kind of video would this be without mentioning Andrew Bynum's disaster of an NBA career? The beginning of it was pretty good, but the ending was laughable. To start, Bynum won 2 championships with Kobe and even found himself in the argument for best center in the NBA at one point. He came into the league at only 17, and he had years to continue improving himself and his game to become an all-time great. His only weakness though was his personality and the fact that he had terrible knees. So how convenient was it that both of these things would come together and permanently take him out for good, when the last major knee injury he suffered occurred while bowling? If those knees couldn't take bowling, then he should have never stepped another foot on the court anyways. Because how do you get hurt bowling? I never thought I'd see an NBA career in that way, or any of these ways as a matter of fact. Which one was your favorite? Or, well, least favorite? Comment down below and let me know.